UK Pride March. And this weekend, the Pride Parade in London returns for the first time since before the pandemic. The theme this year is All Our Pride, uniting the past, present and future of Pride from every corner of the LGBT community. And joining me on the programme is Nick Hewlett, head teacher at St Dunstan's College. You'll remember that Nick came out to his pupils during a school assembly. Nick, hello, good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Vanessa.
Before we talk about Pride, can I just say congratulations on winning Independent Senior School of the Year. How fantastic for you and for St Dunstan's.
Thanks so much. We were absolutely thrilled and delighted and surprised, I have to say, but it's a wonderful endorsement.
Do you know what the criteria are? On what basis do you think you won it?
I think the judge made a comment around us challenging the sector and asking really interesting questions of it around kind of responsibility and privilege and trailblazing a sort of new way of presenting independent education.
Gosh, well, that sounds pretty dramatic and pretty sort of barrier breaking and kind of innovative. I mean, have you presented a new way of presenting senior school education? Give me an example of what that means, because I really have no idea, I must say. Don't know what that means.
Well, I think actually some of it might be connected to the to what we're talking about here with Pride. I think the sector more broadly has become quite conservative, has remained quite conservative, and I think it's time that we recognise that and really sort of tackle it and acknowledge the fact that diversity, particularly in the leadership of our schools, isn't represented as well as it should be, and that I think is a real problem for the pupils who attend schools, not just in the independent schools but in state schools as well.
Yeah.
And that's not just associated with sexuality, but in terms of race, in terms of disability. These are areas that really do need to be improved across the educational landscape, and championing values of diversity is so important for schools to undertake.
And tell me about, because people who were listening that day will recall the conversation, others won't remember the sort of impact of what happened. You were conducting an assembly at your school and used that opportunity to come out to the pupils and the staff at the school. Now, some people at the time felt that this was peculiar as a choice because they thought, your inclinations, your proclivities, the people that you want to sleep with or not sleep with, terrific, and it's absolutely up to you, but it's none of the business of your pupils. You wouldn't expect them to know, you wouldn't expect to tell them, and the whole thing struck some people, as very unexpected and, bewildering. For others, it was a revelation and it was a kind of miraculously healing and important moment. So can you just explain what the impact was at the time and how it all went over?
Yeah, I think there's a real distinction between behaviour and identity. And what I never set out to do was to discuss my personal life. And in fact, I haven't discussed my personal life. I've simply been honest and open around my identity.
Yeah.
And the reason for wanting to do that is because there are a lack of role models for young people, particularly in schools and particularly within the leadership of schools. And I felt that was a real problem. I was struck in particular, we had a visiting speaker who had come and was working with a group of students around issues to do with race.
Yeah.
And he himself was a black man, a very impressive, successful black man. And the impact that had on those children, in particular the black children, was absolutely palpable to me. And I thought to myself at that time, look, if a role model can have that much impact on children who can identify with them through one way or another, why on earth would I not be open about my identity? And I totally accept the view of some that this is sort of drifting into giving far too much of yourself away. But actually, that wasn't what it was about. And that wasn't what happened. What it was about was saying, look, I am here as a happily married gay man, and that's okay. And that's absolutely fine. And if you're someone who is questioning your sexual identity, then we as a school community are here to support you in that. And here I am as a role model for you. And that's really where it came from, Vanessa.
And tell me what the impact was. I mean, obviously there must have been a sharp intake of breath among the pupils and teachers, I'm assuming, and possibly parents. And then what happened in the sort of days and weeks following your revelation? How did you find it having any kind of effect or influence on the way people behaved?
I mean, I was very touched because a lot of people wrote to me saying thank you so much, both students and staff and parents, saying that they were just so pleased. that this had been done and saw it as a real act of kindness.
Yeah.
I suppose in answer to your question, was there a sharp intake of breath? I think the reality is, Vanessa, that there probably wasn't, really, if I'm being honest. And one of the things that struck me over the last 12 months is, of course, this generation that are coming through have frankly most of the questions that I got were around, why is this a big deal? Why is this appearing in the Times? We just don't understand it. And the conversations that I had to have with the children was to remind them of how far society has come. And in fact, I did an assembly on Monday where I was talking to them about Section 28, which and they couldn't believe it. You know, they were outraged by it, that this was happening, and really sort of prevented schools talking about these issues. But just to give you another little anecdote, which I rather liked, I was talking to my head of junior school this morning around when they start having conversations about different types of families and that sort of thing. And she was saying, well, you know, we're very much led by them. And if a nursery child asks a question, then we'll engage in a conversation about it. And they've got books that support it. And one of these books, which was about a same-sex couple, they were going through with this child, and the question was asked by the teacher, do you see anything different in this picture around the relationship? And the child said, well, it's a very nice sofa. It didn't even pick up on there being any difference.
And tell me about pride and your pride in pride, and why you think it's important to celebrate and to acknowledge, and this new theme, which is called All Our Pride.
Yeah, I mean, I think pride is hugely important for a couple of reasons, really. One, because we have come such a very long way, and people have had to fight very hard to get to the point we're at today. And I don't think that should be forgotten. And there were dark times, but, you know, I look at my own upbringing in the 1980s and 1990s. They were very, very difficult times. And again, I reminded the children, at that time, only 10% of British society, 10%, believed that same-sex relationships could be considered a good thing.
Yes.
So we've moved on in 40 years considerably as a society, and pride signposts that. And I think it's important we don't forget it. And I think the second reason it's important is because, of course, the world is not a safe place for LGBT people. It still isn't. And if we look at what's happening in Brazil, in Hungary, in Russia, these are really dark and difficult times for the LGBT community, and that needs to be brought to the fore, and pride is a really good way of doing that.
And what about the LGBT community in London at the moment? I mean, I think some people will imagine that it's absolutely the optimum time to be out and proud, and to be living your best life, and to be in any job at all that you're qualified to be in, and to be in any kind of format of relationship that you want to be. That the times have never been so good, that community has never had it so good. Is that true, or is it still dangerous sometimes and unnerving at others?
I think to an extent I would agree, but of course there are particular groups in the LGBT community for whom life is still incredibly hard. If you look at the trans community in particular, 1 in 5 trans people will have experienced a hate crime in the last 12 months alone in London.
That's awful.
So it cannot be said that it's true of everybody. I think as a gay man, there is absolute truth in that, although I also think that gay men are underrepresented in positions of leadership and authority. But I do agree that is changing. I think we need to broaden this debate around all elements of the LGBT community, because not all people feel safe, and that's tangibly not the case.
And people who think that school isn't the place for this because, you know, pupils need to be concentrating on their geometry and their geography and not thinking about these other issues, which, you know, may obviously play a part in their lives and will, but don't have to be part of the school day. Do you feel that actually, on the contrary, school is just the place for it?
I absolutely do. I mean, I absolutely do. And in fact, we've been really thinking through the purpose of the curriculum here at my school and saying, look, what are we prioritising? Because for goodness sake, if we're not prioritising how we manage young people's identities, if we're not prioritising how we equip young people with the skills to thrive in, let's face it, a really, really challenging, increasingly challenging world, and if we're not overtly tackling those issues around toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, around sexual identity, around conflict resolution, around financial life skills. You know, these are the key things that actually the toolkit young people need as they go out into the world. And if we don't teach that and we prioritise the core traditional curriculum over and above that, I think we've got it completely wrong. And this comes back, for me, what's the purpose of education in this country? What's fundamentally the purpose of it? And for me, it has to be about developing young people who are well-adjusted, grounded, happy with themselves, and go out into the world to have healthy, fruitful, productive lives. First and foremost, it has to be that, not getting a 9 in your maths exam.
On the other hand, when you're trying to make a living, it really helps if you're numerate, if you're literate, if you have some idea where Europe is and whether we are or are not part of it, that kind of a thing. I mean, it does help if you want to be an architect. It helps if you can tell your isosceles from your your right angles, doesn't it? But
the irony, Vanessa, is that if you do what I've said, if the former is achieved, then all of that comes, because if you're a happy, well-adjusted child, actually you will succeed, you'll thrive academically. But you have to get the problem, I think, is that we've gone at it from the wrong way round. We've said first and foremost we're an outcome generated, driven society, and then we'll tack values and life skills and happiness on at the end. Whereas I think actually it has to be turned on its head, and you have to say, let's first and foremost develop well-adjusted children. And once we've got that right, they will academically thrive. They will get their 9s in their maths exams, but they'll do so without neurosis, panic attacks, and going into life constantly fraught.
I suppose, though, people thought that was the province of parents primarily, that to have a well-adjusted child with a decently sort of modulated sense of identity and, the freedom to develop at his or her own pace to be the person that they were destined to be really comes from home. And it's at school that you're ramming home the geography and the algebra.
I don't think you can silo those responsibilities. I mean, the majority of a child's time is spent in term time in school. But of course, they spend a lot of time with their parents or carers or parent as well. And so for us, it's about bringing those two groups of fundamental people in a child's life onto the same page. And I think this is another area that schools really need to work on. How do we ensure that parents understand what is being taught in the school?
How do you ensure that?
Well, I do a video bulletin every week to our parents to update them on what's been going on in the school. I tell them that the theme of the week's been Pride this week, what we've talked about. I publish what we've spoken about in assembly. We publish what we're discussing with them in the classroom, and we do that so that parents, and they're encouraged to do it, have follow-up conversations at home over the dinner table or whatever it may be, so that it's endorsed, challenged in some cases as well, and there's healthy discussion on both sides of the fence going on.
Well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. It really is, and always a lesson too and an enlightenment. So congratulations to you on this fantastic award. This is Nick Hewlett speaking, head teacher at St Dunstan's College, and they've just won Independent Senior School of the Year. So congratulations to you, and a joy as ever to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. We'll take a trail and we'll be straight back with you.
BBC Radio London.